There is a mistake most men make that never appears in their words, never shows up in their intentions, and almost never reaches consciousness. It appears first in the body, in the voice that subtly rises when it should descend, in the posture that leans forward when it should remain grounded, in the breathing that accelerates when silence would create gravity, in the eyes that search for confirmation instead of projecting certainty. And the uncomfortable truth is this: women detect this error before you finish your first sentence. Not intellectually, physiologically. Men believe attraction is negotiated through behavior, effort, clarity, emotional availability, and explanation. What they don't realize is that long before meaning is processed, the female nervous system has already classified you, not as good or bad, not as kind or cruel, but as centered or displaced, as grounded or leaking, as someone who has an internal axis, or someone who is orbiting hers. What you are about to hear dismantles one of the most comforting lies men were raised with. That desire is earned through correctness. That respect comes from accommodation. That attraction grows from emotional transparency. It doesn't, and the body knows it before the mind dares to admit it. Let me ask you something directly. Have you ever felt a woman's interest fade precisely when you thought you were doing everything right, being open, attentive, present, emotionally available, and yet something in her tone, her rhythm, her eyes quietly withdrew? That moment wasn't confusion. It was detection. There is a silent psychological law operating beneath modern narratives about relationships, communication, and equality. A law that doesn't argue, doesn't justify itself, doesn't explain, it simply selects. And it selects based on something most men never train: internal structure. The man who tries to please lives outside himself. He monitors, he adjusts, he reacts, he explains, he calibrates every move based on feedback. And because of that, his body never fully settles. His nervous system stays alert, slightly tense, subtly asking, is this okay? Am I doing this right? Did I lose ground? Women don't respond to the question. They respond to the state behind it. This is why so many men experience the same paradox. The more emotionally available they become, the less desired they feel. The more they try to clarify intentions, the more ambiguous the response becomes. The more they invest, the less gravity they seem to carry. The error is invisible because it isn't verbal. It's positional. You're standing in the wrong psychological place. Modern culture teaches men to relate through emotional disclosure, negotiation, and reassurance. What it doesn't teach is that the female nervous system evolved to respond first to direction, not explanation, to presence, not performance, to stability under tension, not emotional expressiveness. This is not ideology. It is physiology layered with psychology. Before a woman processes who you are, her body evaluates how you are. Your rhythm, your stillness, your resistance to being pulled out of center, your capacity to remain unmoved by emotional fluctuation. And here is the part most men never hear. When you over-explain, over-justify, or over-offer emotionally, your body signals uncertainty. Even if your words are confident, the body always betrays the inner axis. This is why attraction often dies after intimacy begins. Because intimacy without structure creates exposure without containment. And exposure without containment feels unsafe at a primal level. Men assume women want emotional access. What they actually respond to is emotional containment. Containment is not distance. It is not coldness. It is not indifference. Containment is the capacity to hold your emotional state steady while pressure is applied. The man who loses this becomes reactive. The man who maintains it becomes magnetic. Psychology has observed this without fully naming it. Neuroscience hints at it through regulation theory. Philosophy touched it when it spoke of self-mastery as the foundation of authority. But socially, this truth was buried because it sounds dangerous. Because it contradicts the narrative that attraction is moral, rational, and consciously chosen. It isn't. The female nervous system is constantly scanning for who leads emotionally, not through dominance, but through coherence, not through control of her, but through control of self. When you seek approval, you invert polarity. When you seek permission to exist as you are, You surrender psychological altitude. When you adapt too quickly, you communicate that your center is negotiable. And nothing dissolves attraction faster than a man whose center moves under pressure. This is where most men misunderstand confidence. They think confidence is expression. It isn't. Confidence is non-reactivity paired with direction. The body of a centered man does not rush to fill silence, does not collapse under uncertainty, does not explain itself into relevance. His pauses have weight. His presence occupies space without apology. His emotions move, but they don't spill. And this creates a subtle internal shift in women they rarely verbalize, a shift from evaluation to attunement, from observation to response, because something ancient recognizes this man is not looking to be led. Here is the uncomfortable pivot. Most men are not rejected for who they are. They are rejected for where they stand internally. Reactive men stand inside the emotional field of the woman. Centered men stand as a reference point. This difference changes everything. When you stand inside her field, you chase signals. When you stand as a reference, she adjusts to you. Not consciously, somatically. This is why attempts to communicate better often backfire. Why emotional availability without structure leads to loss of desire. Why men who do less but remain grounded generate more attraction than men who do everything right. It's not about effort, it's about axis. Clinical psychology would describe this as self-regulation dominance. Neuroscience would point to nervous system coherence. Philosophy would call it sovereignty, but in lived reality it feels like something simpler. You stop chasing emotional alignment and become it. The moment a man stops trying to enter a woman's emotional world and instead remains anchored in his own, something shifts. Her behavior changes before her thoughts do. Her tone adjusts. Her timing softens. Her tests become more frequent, not to reject, but to verify. And here is the key most men miss. Tests are not rejection. They are requests for structure. A woman tests the man whose presence she feels but hasn't yet trusted. She destabilizes slightly to see if he collapses or remains. If he reacts, explains, or seeks reassurance, the test answers itself. If he holds, slows, and stays centered, attraction consolidates. This is not manipulation, it is calibration. The men who fail believe the test is about words. It never is. It's about state under pressure. This is why the body betrays men before they realize what happened. Their posture changes, their voice tightens, their tempo accelerates. They lean in emotionally and lose ground psychologically. The man who holds position does the opposite. He creates space instead of filling it. He allows tension instead of resolving it prematurely. He stays oriented inward while remaining engaged outward. This produces something rare in modern interactions: psychological gravity. And gravity does not chase, it pulls. By the time a woman consciously evaluates whether she is attracted, her body has already responded to your structure, or lack of it. This is why attraction feels irrational. Why women say one thing and feel another. Why men become confused trying to argue desire into existence. Desire does not listen, it reacts. And it reacts to who remains whole under emotional tension. At this point, you may feel resistance. That resistance is not disagreement. It is the collapse of a comforting illusion that being good, open, and emotionally available is enough. It isn't. Those traits without structure create exposure without authority, connection without polarity, closeness without magnetism. The forbidden part of this theory is not about women, it's about men. It forces you to confront where you leak energy, where you seek validation, where your center shifts in response to her mood, her tone, her attention. Because once you see this, you can no longer unsee it. And when you begin to rebuild your internal axis, your emotional center, your pacing, your tolerance for silence, your ability to remain unreactive, the external world responds differently. Not because you demand it, but because you finally occupy your place. This is only the first layer. In the next block, the mechanism becomes clearer and more uncomfortable, because it reveals why some men leave permanent emotional imprints without trying, while others disappear no matter how much they give. And once that mechanism is visible, you will never approach women the same way again. If block 1 disturbed you, this is where the disturbance becomes clarity. Because now the invisible pattern stops being abstract and becomes personal, you begin to notice something unsettling. Some men don't try to be desired, and yet women orbit them emotionally for years. Not because these men are perfect, not because they are morally superior, not because they offer more, but because they occupy a psychological altitude that cannot be accessed through effort. This is where most men break, because everything you were taught says attraction is built through giving. Attention, care, validation, availability. And yet the men who create the deepest emotional imprint give less, but contain more. What separates them is not behavior, it is structure. Women do not attach emotionally to what they can fully predict, access, fully regulate. They attach to what they can feel, but not command. This is the part modern language avoids because it sounds uncomfortable. The female psyche does not bond to submission. It bonds to admiration. Admiration is not respect for morality. It is not agreement. It is not comfort. Admiration is the perception of psychological depth, and depth is created when a man has layers that are not immediately penetrable, not because he hides, but because his life is oriented inward, not toward her reaction. The man who orbits a woman becomes legible. The man who remains oriented toward his own direction becomes opaque. Opacity creates tension. Tension creates fascination. Fascination sustains desire. This is not manipulation. It is architecture. A woman may enjoy controlling emotional access. She may enjoy leading interaction. But she does not bond to what she controls. She bonds to what resists without opposing. Resistance is not argument. It is non-collapse. The deepest mistake men make is assuming that emotional closeness is built by revealing everything. In reality, emotional closeness is built when a woman senses that no amount of proximity will dissolve your center. This is why emotional overexposure kills desire. Not because vulnerability is weak, but because uncontained vulnerability dissolves polarity. The man who spills becomes absorbable. The man who contains remains distinct, and distinction is erotic. Neuroscience has already mapped this quietly. Dopamine does not spike with certainty. It spikes with stable unpredictability, not chaos, not volatility, but rhythm that is self-directed. A man who reacts emotionally becomes predictable. A man who remains regulated becomes intriguing. This is why women often remain emotionally attached to men who never chased them, men who never explained themselves into relevance, men who never adjusted their core to maintain interest. Those men were not withholding affection. They were simply not organized around it. Their emotional world had weight, and weight bends attention. Attraction is not about being chosen. It is about being felt as higher altitude. Altitude does not mean superiority in ego. It means depth of internal order. When a woman senses that your emotional system does not reorganize itself around her approval, something in her nervous system shifts from evaluation to orientation. She stops asking, "How do I like him?" and starts feeling, "Where do I stand with him?" That question alone reveals the shift in polarity. This is the forbidden realization. Women do not want to lead emotionally. They want to relax into a structure that already exists, not dominance over her, dominance over self. The man who regulates his impulses, his attention, his reactions, his pace, without suppression, without rigidity, becomes a psychological anchor. Anchors don't move, others adjust around them. This is why women test men they are attracted to more intensely. They are not trying to destabilize you. They are verifying that you cannot be destabilized. A man who interprets tests as rejection fails instantly. A man who understands tests as calibration remains unmoved. He doesn't confront. He doesn't explain. He doesn't withdraw emotionally. He holds rhythm, and rhythm is the language of the nervous system. At this level, attraction is no longer conscious. It becomes somatic loyalty. A woman may leave, she may explore, she may rationalize, but the imprint remains when the man represented psychological altitude she never surpassed. This is why some men are never fully forgotten, not because they were kind, not because they were intense, but because they were unshakable without being rigid. The final illusion to dismantle is this: that desire is created by being understood. It isn't. Desire is created by being felt as deeper than the other person can fully grasp. Understanding creates safety. Depth creates longing. And longing is what binds. This is where philosophy and psychology converge. Self-mastery has always been the root of authority. Not authority over others, but authority over one's own internal state. When you no longer negotiate your identity through reaction, when you no longer perform emotional availability to secure attachment, when you stop seeking confirmation through engagement, you become something rare in modern interaction, a man with internal sovereignty. And sovereignty is magnetic. This is the payoff most men never reach because it requires letting go of the fantasy of control through effort. You stop trying to manage attraction, you stop managing perception, you stop managing her response, and in doing so, you become the one response reorganizes around. This is why the forbidden theory is misunderstood. It is not about women at all. It is about the collapse of the needy male structure. Once that structure dissolves, what remains is presence, direction, containment. You don't manipulate, you don't convince, you don't chase, you occupy, and occupation changes the field. At this stage, men often feel a quiet internal shift, less urgency, less reactivity, more stillness, more tolerance for silence, more patience under ambiguity. That patience is not passivity, it is power, because the man who does not rush to resolve tension controls the frame. This is the final truth behind the title. The forbidden theory is not about how women think. It is about how women respond to structure. They respond to the man who does not seek to be desired, but whose internal order makes desire inevitable. This is not manipulation. It is alignment. You stop asking how to attract and start asking how to remain centered under pressure, from anxious to grounded, from reactive to directive, from asking to receiving. That is the irreversible transformation. And once you cross that threshold, you cannot go back to the old way of relating because it feels hollow, exposed, unstable. If you want to go deeper into this, not intellectually but structurally, there is a system designed to rebuild this internal architecture, not through tricks, not through scripts, but through reprogramming emotional response, nervous system regulation, and psychological framing. A code, a method, a domain of self-mastery. The continuation is there, for those who are ready to stop reacting and start occupying their position. Because once you understand this mechanism, attraction stops being mysterious. It becomes inevitable. At this point, the illusion should already be broken. Because the forbidden theory was never about decoding women, predicting behavior, or gaining leverage over attraction. It was about recognizing a law that operates silently beneath every interaction. Women respond to structure, not intention. The man who loses himself trying to be chosen disappears. The man who remains internally ordered becomes unforgettable. This is the mechanism no one names. Desire does not attach to effort. It attaches to emotional altitude. When you stop negotiating your presence, when you stop adjusting your center to match her reactions, when your body no longer asks for permission through tone, posture, pace, or explanation, something irreversible happens. You move from inside her emotional field to becoming the reference point, from anxiety to grounded stillness, from reaction to direction, from seeking to being sought, not because you demand it, but because your nervous system no longer collapses under pressure. This is why attraction consolidates around men who do not chase clarity. They tolerate tension, they allow silence, they let uncertainty exist without rushing to resolve it. And in that space, admiration forms. Not admiration for kindness, not admiration for compliance, but admiration for internal sovereignty. The final truth is simple and uncomfortable. Women do not bond to what they can control. They bond to what they can feel, but cannot move. This is not manipulation. It is alignment with psychological reality. And once you embody this, there is no going back to the man who explains, justifies, adapts, and asks. You no longer react. You occupy. And what occupies its place does not need to convince. If you choose to go further, the continuation is not information, it is structure. a system, a code, a method of reprogramming how you hold tension, emotion, and presence. Because the man who masters himself never has to chase desire again. He becomes the point around which it turns.